August 6, 1942. The sweltering heat of summer hung heavy over Tokyo as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat in his office at Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters, examining production reports with increasingly furrowed brows. Outside, patriotic posters celebrated the inevitable victory against American forces, while inside, the architect of Pearl Harbor was beginning to see the first clear signs of the catastrophic miscalculation he had made exactly 8 months prior. In the coming hours, a series of revelations would shatter the confidence of Japan's highest naval command, forcing them to confront a truth they had desperately tried to ignore. That waking the American industrial giant would prove to be the most fatal mistake in Japanese military history. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of how, in a single pivotal day, Japan's most brilliant military minds came to realize they had not crippled America's fighting spirit with their surprise attack, but had instead unleashed an unprecedented industrial juggernaut that would ultimately crush their empire beneath its unstoppable productive might. Admiral Yamamoto began his morning routine at precisely 0500 hours, as he had every day since the war began. At 57 years old, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet maintained the disciplined schedule of a man half his age. Lieutenant Commander Watanabe Yasushi, his loyal aide for the past 3 years, arrived with the morning intelligence briefing as Yamamoto finished his modest breakfast of rice, miso soup, and grilled fish. "Good morning, Admiral," Watanabe said with a crisp bow. "The consolidated reports from our naval attaches in Europe and intelligence from the Pacific Theater have arrived." Yamamoto nodded, wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin. "And the special production assessment I requested?" "Here, sir." Watanabe handed him a thick folder stamped with red characters marking it as top secret. "The complete analysis of American industrial output, as compiled by our Economic Intelligence Division." "Thank you, Watanabe-san. Please inform Commander Mayo and Captain Kurishima that I wish to see them at 0900 hours. And arrange for Vice Admiral Agaki to join us as well." "Hi, Admiral." Watanabe bowed again and left the room. Alone now, Yamamoto opened the folder and began to read. The information contained within these pages had been gathered at great risk by Japanese intelligence operatives throughout the United States, collated with intercepted communications and analyses from naval attaches who had lived in America before the war. What they revealed would change everything. The first page detailed American aircraft production. In December 1941, the month of Pearl Harbor, the United States had produced 669 combat aircraft. By July 1942, that number had exploded to 2,570 aircraft in a single month. Yamamoto's hand trembled slightly as he calculated the percentage increase. 384% in just 7 months. He flipped to the section on naval production. The statistics were equally alarming. America had laid down 8 Essex-class aircraft carriers since Pearl Harbor, with the first scheduled to be commissioned in just 6 months, an unprecedented shipbuilding pace. The report indicated that American shipyards were now capable of producing a new Fletcher-class destroyer every 2 weeks, with 175 currently under construction. "Impossible," Yamamoto whispered to himself, though he knew the figures were meticulously verified. As a man who had studied at Harvard and served as naval attaché in Washington, he understood America's industrial potential better than anyone in the Japanese leadership. Yet even he had underestimated the speed with which that sleeping giant could awaken. Meanwhile, across Tokyo at Imperial Army headquarters, Colonel Takashiro Hattori was preparing his own briefing for Chief of Staff General Hajime Sugiyama. At 34, Hattori was considered one of the Army's brightest strategic minds, having graduated first in his class from the Imperial Japanese Army Academy. "These American production numbers cannot possibly be accurate," General Sugiyama insisted, tapping his finger on the report Hattori had prepared. "Our intelligence sources must be compromised." "Sir, with respect, we have confirmed these figures through multiple independent channels," Colonel Hattori replied carefully. "The Americans began converting civilian factories to military production within days of our attack on Pearl Harbor. Ford Motor Company alone is now producing one B-24 bomber every 63 minutes, at their Willow Run plant. That's a complete 4-engine heavy bomber, sir. Sugiyama's face darkened. And our own production? Hattori hesitated before answering. Japan produced 54 heavy bombers last month, sir. The comparison was stark. America was now manufacturing in a single day what Japan struggled to produce in a month. The general stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the Imperial Palace grounds. What about their new aircraft carrier, the one that attacked us at Midway 2 months ago? The USS Yorktown was severely damaged at the Coral Sea in May, yet somehow participated in the Midway battle in June. Yes, sir, Hattori confirmed. American shipyard workers at Pearl Harbor completed what should have been 3 months of repairs in just 72 hours. Over 1,400 men working in continuous shifts. We have nothing comparable in our repair capabilities. Back at Naval Headquarters, Yamamoto's meeting with his senior staff had begun. Vice Admiral Mato Magaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, was reviewing the intelligence with visible concern. Admiral, if these production figures are accurate, the Americans will have overwhelming material superiority by early 1943, Agaki said, his normally confident voice wavering. The figures are accurate, Agaki-san, Yamamoto replied quietly. I have cross-referenced them with my own sources from my time in Washington. If anything, they are conservative estimates. Commander Yasuji Watanabe interjected. The American system of mass production is unlike anything we can achieve. Their ability to standardize parts and implement assembly line techniques for complex war machines is, frankly, it's beyond our current industrial capacity. Captain Kamito Kurishima, Yamamoto's senior operations officer and trusted confidant, spread a map across the table. With these production disparities, our original war plans are no longer viable. We calculated that America would take at least 18 months to recover from Pearl Harbor before mounting a serious counteroffensive. But they're already pushing back in the Solomon Islands. The Marines landed on Guadalcanal just 3 days ago. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Yamamoto had famously warned before the war that Japan might run wild for 6 months, perhaps a year, but after that, he had serious doubts. Now, exactly 8 months after Pearl Harbor, his prediction was proving eerily accurate. At that moment, a junior officer knocked and entered with a telegram. Urgent message from Admiral Mikawa's 8th Fleet, sir. Yamamoto took the telegram and read it silently. His expression remained impassive, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. Gentlemen, the Americans have landed significant forces on Guadalcanal and seized our airfield under construction. Admiral Mikawa is preparing a night attack against their supporting naval forces, but this confirms what we feared. The Americans are already on the offensive. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Miyazaki, a naval intelligence officer who had been educated in the United States, spoke up. Sir, I've analyzed their Liberty ship program. The Americans have reduced construction time from 355 days to just 42 days per cargo vessel. Henry Kaiser's shipyards are now launching a new 10,000-ton transport ship every week. By comparison, it takes us approximately 7 months to build a ship of comparable size. Yamamoto nodded grimly. And each of those ships can carry enough material to supply an entire division. As the meeting continued in Tokyo, across the Pacific in Washington, D.C., a very different scene was unfolding at the Navy Department. Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, was meeting with his production chiefs and the representatives from America's industrial heartland. Gentlemen, President Roosevelt has set our production targets for 1943, Admiral King announced to the assembled group. We are to produce 75,000 aircraft, 10,000 tanks, and 17 million tons of merchant shipping. The question is not if we can meet these goals, but by how much we can exceed them. William Knudsen, former president of General Motors and now serving as director of production in the Office of War Production Management, nodded confidently. The conversion of civilian factories is ahead of schedule, Admiral. Packard Motor Car Company is already producing Rolls-Royce Merlin engines at a rate that exceeds Britain's entire production. And that's just one factory. Admiral King turned to Henry Kaiser, the industrialist whose shipyards had revolutionized maritime construction. Mr. Kaiser, your progress reports are nothing short of miraculous. How do you account for the reduction in construction time? Kaiser, a burly man with boundless energy despite his 60 years, leaned forward eagerly. Prefabrication, Admiral. We don't build ships anymore. We assemble them from pre-made sections. We've broken shipbuilding into 250 distinct steps, with specialized teams handling each one. The SS Robert E. Peary was just completed in 4 days and 15 hours from keel laying to launch. We're aiming to get that down to 3 days by year's end. The men around the table nodded appreciatively. What Kaiser and the others didn't know was that this very conversation was being summarized in a report that would land on Yamamoto's desk the following day, further confirming Japan's worst fears. Back in Tokyo, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the Imperial Palace grounds, Lieutenant Commander Chikao Yamamoto, no relation to the Admiral, arrived at Naval Headquarters with additional intelligence that would complete the day's devastating picture. Admiral, we've intercepted and decoded American logistics communications, he reported to Yamamoto and his still-assembled staff. Their Supply Priority and Allocation Board has categorized the Pacific War as Theater 3 in terms of resource allocation. A confused murmur ran through the room. I don't understand, said Vice Admiral Agaki. What does Theater 3 signify? Lieutenant Commander Yamamoto swallowed hard before answering. It means, sir, that we are facing only 15% of America's war production capacity. Approximately 65% is allocated to defeating Germany in Europe, designated as Theater 1, while 20% goes to Theater 2, the protection of Atlantic shipping lanes. The implications were staggering. If the Americans were already matching and beginning to overtake Japanese production while allocating only a fraction of their industrial might to the Pacific War, what would happen when they could focus more resources against Japan? Admiral Yamamoto dismissed his staff but asked Captain Kurishima to remain. Once they were alone, the Admiral walked to a small cabinet and removed a bottle of Suntory whiskey and 2 glasses. Such indulgence was rare for the disciplined commander. You disapproved of the Pearl Harbor attack from the beginning, didn't you, Kurishima? Yamamoto asked as he poured 2 modest measures. I had concerns about its long-term strategic implications. Yes, Admiral, Kurishima replied carefully. You were right, Yamamoto said simply, handing his subordinate a glass. I believe that destroying their Pacific fleet would buy us the time we needed to secure our resource objectives in Southeast Asia and establish a defensive perimeter so formidable that America would accept a negotiated peace rather than pay the blood price to breach it. Many shared that belief, sir, Kurishima offered consolingly. But you didn't, Yamamoto said with a sad smile. You quoted Sherman to me, as I recall. War is all hell, you said, and the American capacity for waging it is without limit once they are fully committed. Those were your words. I spent 3 years at their Naval War College, sir. I saw their industrial heartland. The Pittsburgh steel mills alone produce more than our entire nation. Yamamoto nodded and sipped his whiskey. We have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve, he murmured, repeating words he had written in his diary the day after Pearl Harbor. As this somber conversation took place, a very different scene was unfolding at the Toyota Machine Works in Korea. Factory director Kichiro Toyota, founder of the automobile division that would later become Toyota Motor Corporation, was meeting with Army procurement officers. Honorable gentlemen, I must be frank, Toyota said, bowing apologetically. The production quotas you have set are simply impossible to meet with current methods. We cannot produce 200 trucks per month with the steel allocations we have received. Major Kenji Tomita, the Army's chief procurement officer for motorized transport, glared at the industrialist. The Imperial Army requires these vehicles for operations in the Philippines and Malaya. Other factories have found ways to meet their quotas. Are you suggesting that Toyota lacks the same spirit of sacrifice? Not at all, Major. Toyota replied calmly. I am suggesting that we must fundamentally change our production methods if we hope to compete with American efficiency. I have studied Ford's assembly line techniques extensively. He unrolled a large diagram on the table. This is my proposal for a just-in-time production system that would reduce waste and increase output. With your permission, I would like to implement these changes immediately. Major Tomita scanned the diagram with obvious skepticism. These are untested theories, Toyota-san. We need trucks now, not experiments. With respect, Major, the Americans are not using untested theories. They are using proven methods on an unprecedented scale. Unless we adapt, we cannot hope to match them. This exchange highlighted another critical disadvantage facing Japan: cultural resistance to industrial innovation. While American factories embraced efficiency experts, standardization, and radical new production techniques, many Japanese manufacturers remained bound by traditional methods and hierarchical structures that stifled rapid adaptation. As darkness fell over Tokyo on that fateful August day, Admiral Yamamoto prepared to send an encrypted message to the emperor's military cabinet. The message, classified at the highest level, would never be seen by Allied intelligence during the war, but its contents would be reflected in subsequent Japanese strategy. Based on comprehensive analysis of American industrial capacity and current production trajectories, Yamamoto wrote, "It is my solemn duty to report that our initial strategic assumptions regarding United States recovery capacity following the Pearl Harbor operation have proven gravely inaccurate. We now face an industrial disparity that military valor alone cannot overcome." He paused, weighing his next words carefully, knowing they bordered on the unthinkable in Japan's martial culture. "I therefore recommend immediate diplomatic initiatives through neutral channels to explore negotiation possibilities while our military position remains tenable. Failing such a diplomatic resolution, I must advise preparations for a protracted conflict with increasingly unfavorable material conditions. In other words, seek peace now or face inevitable defeat." A conclusion reached just 8 months after the victory at Pearl Harbor. That night, as Yamamoto finally retired to his quarters, he retrieved a worn copy of The Great Pacific War, a novel written by British naval writer Hector Bywater in 1925. The book had eerily predicted a Japanese surprise attack on the U.S. followed by an American industrial response that would ultimately crush Japan. Yamamoto had read it years earlier as naval attaché in Washington and had been deeply influenced by its strategic insights. "We are now living Chapter 10, he murmured to himself, with the worst still to come. The following morning, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who would later become the father of the kamikaze program, arrived at naval headquarters for consultations. He found Yamamoto already at his desk, studying a map of the Pacific with newly placed markers showing American force dispositions. "You summoned me, Admiral?" Onishi asked after the customary bow. "Yes, Onishi-san. I want your assessment of our naval air strength compared to the Americans' current and projected capabilities." Onishi, a former head of the Naval Aeronautics Department, was brutally honest. "Our current advantage in pilot experience is rapidly being eroded. American training programs are producing pilots at 15 times our rate. While our current pilots are superior in experience, their numerical advantage will overwhelm us within 6 months. And aircraft quality. Their new Hellcat fighter will outclass our Zero in most performance metrics. Their Corsair is even more formidable. We have nothing in development that can match either." Yamamoto nodded grimly. "And our capacity to replace losses?" Here Onishi hesitated. The question touched on the most fundamental weakness in Japan's strategic position. "Admiral, at current operational tempo, we can replace only about 40% of our anticipated aircraft losses. For experienced pilots, the number is closer to 15%. The Americans can replace 100% of both and still show growth." These cold statistics underscored the fatal asymmetry of the Pacific War. While Japan would be forced to husband its dwindling resources and irreplaceable trained personnel, America could wage a war of attrition with seemingly limitless reserves. Across Tokyo, in a secure conference room at the Ministry of Munitions, civilian economic planners were coming to similar conclusions through different analyses. Director Nobusuke Kishi, the brilliant bureaucrat who managed Japan's wartime economy, and who, ironically, would become prime minister decades after the war, was meeting with his top economic advisors. "Gentlemen, our latest comparative analysis of steel production tells the entire story," Kishi stated flatly. "Japan's total annual steel production capacity is approximately 7 million tons. The United States produced 8.5 million tons last month alone. Their single largest steel plant, Gary Works in Indiana, has a greater annual capacity than our entire nation. The implications for naval construction were particularly dire. Each Essex-class carrier required approximately 20,000 tons of steel. Japan's entire 1942 naval steel allocation could produce at most 4 fleet carriers, assuming no steel was used for anything else. The Americans could build 12 carriers and still have abundant steel for other warships. But surely their quality must suffer with such rapid production, suggested Akira Muto, one of Kishi's deputies. On the contrary, replied Professor Aichi Tanaka, who had studied American industrial methods at MIT before the war. Their standardization actually improves quality while reducing production time. Each Liberty ship now requires 600,000 man-hours compared to our 2.3 million man-hours for an equivalent vessel. Yet their ships show lower failure rates and better performance metrics. As these discussions continued across Tokyo, revealing the full magnitude of the strategic miscalculation, thousands of miles away on Guadalcanal, the first major American land offensive of the Pacific War was gaining momentum. The battle that would become a grueling 6-month test of wills was just beginning, but already the industrial disparity was making itself felt. Lieutenant General Harakichi Hayakatake, commander of the Japanese 17th Army tasked with retaking Guadalcanal, was facing the consequences of Japan's production shortfalls firsthand. His troops would fight with extraordinary courage in the coming months, but they would do so on dwindling rations, with limited ammunition, and without the air and naval support necessary for victory. By contrast, the American Marines on Guadalcanal would initially struggle with supply problems, but within weeks, a steady stream of Liberty ships would be delivering tanks, artillery, aircraft, ammunition, food, and medicine in quantities that Japanese officers found scarcely believable. Back in Tokyo, as August 6th drew to a close, Admiral Yamamoto made one final entry in his personal diary, a document that would only be discovered after Japan's surrender 3 years later. Today I have seen the future of this war with perfect clarity, and it is a future I long feared but hoped never to witness. The industrial might of America is a physical force as real and as unstoppable as a law of nature. No amount of spiritual strength or fighting skill can compensate for the disparity we now face. In attacking Pearl Harbor, we have accomplished precisely what we sought to avoid. We have united the American people and unleashed their full productive capacity against us. I shall continue to fight with all my skill and energy, as duty demands. But I do so now with the knowledge that unless a diplomatic miracle occurs, our defeat is certain. May the gods forgive us for our miscalculation. The revelation that crystallized for Japan's leadership on August 6, 1942, was not just about numbers on production reports. It was the fundamental recognition that the war would not be decided by the samurai spirit, tactical brilliance, or even the courage of Japanese fighting men. It would be decided in American factories where women now worked around the clock, on American assembly lines where a new B-24 bomber rolled out every hour, and in American shipyards where welders completed in days what had previously taken months. Pearl Harbor, far from being the crippling blow Japan had intended, had galvanized American industrial might in a way nothing else could have. The surprise attack had not only failed to knock America out of the war, it had all but guaranteed Japan's eventual defeat. In the years that followed, as American production continued to accelerate beyond even the most alarming projections seen on that August day, the strategic situation grew increasingly hopeless. By war's end, America had built 141 aircraft carriers of all types, a number so large that the Japanese High Command initially refused to believe it when their intelligence reported it. The United States had produced over 324,000 aircraft during the war years, compared to Japan's 76,000. The Empire of Japan fought on with characteristic determination and sacrifice, but the industrial handwriting had been on the wall since that sweltering August day in 1942, when the men who had planned Pearl Harbor finally recognized it for what it truly was. Not the masterful stroke they had imagined, but the single most catastrophic strategic error in Japanese military history. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.